All right, good morning, everyone. It is Friday, March 14th. Wrapping up policy crossover week with two bills. First one we are tending to is H 397 and act relating to miscellaneous amendments to the statutes governing emergency management and flood response. We had asked council to dial in some language based on testimony and some other requests. So we had some language to look at and review this morning. It is posted on our page. And I would like to start by asking council to come up to the table and run us through the changes. How are we doing this morning?
We are fantastic. Apparently I'm using the royal we now.
It's better than the collective.
Well, good morning, everyone. I will run you through about 4 or 5 significant changes. What is now draft 2.1 of the committee's amendment to H 397. First, I will flag that I have given you reader assistance headings for each chunk of the bill so that as you move through it, you can orient yourself to generally what is going to be in the ensuing 2 to 3 sections in each chunk. So the first new reader assistance heading is just for the plans and reports of the Division of Emergency Management. And the one new piece that I have to run you through is in section 1. This is a new section 1. And this amends 20 VSA section 3A, which relates to the duties of the Division of Emergency Management. And the last time that you all got together to discuss this amendment, the committee asked me to incorporate some recommendations from the state auditor. This is that recommendation. So this adds a new subdivision A3 to section 3A that requires annually, on or before the last legislative day in January, the Division of Emergency Management to provide an update and presentation to your committee and the Senate Committee on Government Operations concerning all action items in the All Hazards Mitigation Plan that is required by subdivision 1 of this subsection. And just to let you all know, in current law, the underlying law here in subdivision 1, there is a clause that requires the Division of Emergency Management to develop and maintain an all hazards mitigation plan. The last time that you discussed this, there was overlapping conversation with another section of the bill that deals with what is known as the statewide emergency management plan. And there's a little bit of confusion in the discussion because this is something separate that the division does. Their all hazard mitigation plan, which relates to some requirements under FEMA regulations that the division is required to meet. This new language would require the division, as they're annually updating progress on that all hazards mitigation plan pursuant to those federal regulations, to appear before your committee and give you a presentation on what the updates to that plan have been within the last year.
Any questions?
All right, the next new addition to the committee's amendment can be found on page 3 of draft 2.1 under the reader assistance heading for the voluntary buyout program and voluntary buyout reimbursement program. So to bring us all back, both in this bill is introduced and the last amendment that you looked at, there was established a voluntary buyout program where municipalities, through a property owner, could apply to acquire a flood-prone property for its full market value. Then in the amendment that you looked at, there were some proposals to establish a program within the agency of administration to reimburse the municipalities for the lost property tax when these currently residential properties are acquired by the municipality and maintained as open space. The reimbursement program or at least the language that the committee took a look at, had an express requirement that those properties be maintained and preserved as open space, essentially having some sort of covenant against development. So the change in what is now Section 3, amending 20 VSA Section 51, is the very last sentence, which states expressly the municipality shall maintain the acquired property as open space with a permanent restriction on the development of the property. This is the language that was provided to the committee that had come originally from the governor's proposed budget. Something that I will flag for you. And I mentioned this to a few of you in the chair when I came into the room. I've had short time to review this language and do some legal analysis of the consequences here. And to avoid an argument that this violates what is known as the common law rule against perpetuities, that last clause needs a little bit of a tweak that I will provide to the committee in what will be draft 2.2 for your consideration later this afternoon. But the end of that will now read that it is a recorded restrictive covenant against development. And it's a very nuanced change, but it is important to clarifying what is happening here. If that sounds okay to the committee.
I believe the nodding heads find it a bit. Yes.
Definitely for a title for 50 years.
You got a clerk in the room.
As long as they pay their fees for acquiring the copies of those records. All right. The next few changes are all discrete, and what I'll do is I'll walk you through Section 4 just to refresh your recollection about the reimbursement program, because there were lots of small changes made within the section to kind of tighten up the language, clean it up a little bit, and I'll explain some of the policy impacts that that cleanup has that align with what I understood to be the instructions of the committee. So if you're with me, we're on page 4 in the new Section 3710 and Title 32. First, in subsection A, the restrictive covenant language will have to change here as well, but it is no longer bracketed at the end because it is my understanding that the committee wanted all of these sections to be consistent with each other. The last version that you looked at had conflicting proposals about how the property could be used. So now all throughout, there's a consistent requirement that this be preserved as open space. That change is also made in subsection B. In subsection D, we're on page 5 on line 4. The last time we got together, I introduced the committee to the concept of linear decay. And that is because there was a clause in here that, if read in its strictest terms, would have required that every 5 years, the amount the municipality receives to be diminished by half. So that 25 years down the line, the pilot fund tax payment would be something like $12.50 to the municipality. This language has been corrected so that you have an initial 5-year period where the municipality receives the full payment calculated under the preceding subdivision or subsection C. And then for 5-year chunks after that, as long as the property continues to qualify for the program, they'll get half of that amount. It won't decay over time. They will just get half of the original payment amount every 5 years. Hopefully I articulated that in clear terms. No more linear decay.
So
Well, I thought with a hand first and referred to member from Dorset.
So for the first 5 years, it's 100%. The next 5 years, it's 50%.
5 years after that, 50%, 5 years after that,
50%
now of the original
of
amount.
the original amount. So it does not keep going down.
Correct.
It's 50% for every 5
Yes,
years.
every 5 years.
One payment every 5 years.
One payment annually, I believe, is how subsection C establishes this. So it's reconsidered every 5 years under these terms.
Reconsidered.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the payment recalibrates every 5 years, but it stays static for the 5 years.
Thank you.
So open land,
Yes.
completely free of any development. Can't put a Christmas tree farm on it. Can't put a slide.
That is correct. And I did ask for some feedback on whether open space is the correct term under our land use and development statutes. And the feedback that I got is it is the correct term if what we are talking about is conserved space that could be used, for example, for parks or recreation or natural areas or even just flood mitigation open space, but not for commercial or residential development. All right. That is all here. I will have some notes later on about some shifts in the pilot fund language just to make sure that it complies with how the pilot fund operates. And that is just a shift in what was formerly labeled an appropriation, but is properly termed a transfer. And we'll jump into that right now. Section 5. This is a new section, which is the transfers from the pilot special fund to the voluntary buyout reimbursement program. This section notwithstands 32 VSA section 3709 for any conflicting provision. That is the use of the pilot special fund. In fiscal year 2026, the Commissioner of Finance and Management is directed to transfer from the pilot special fund to the voluntary buyout reimbursement program $1 million for purposes of the administration of the reimbursement program. So this was formerly labeled as an appropriation. I had flagged for the committee. Nothing is actually being appropriated. Money is just being moved from one fund to a different fund. So according to the drafting manual, this is a transfer and it has been labeled as a transfer here. Okay. Shifting to page 8. Under the Reader Assistance heading, Vermont Community Radio Program. The contents of this section and an appropriation later in the bill are taken from H307. Which was an act relating to the creation of the Vermont Community Radio Program. All of this language will be new to the committee for purposes of this bill. Would you like me to walk through these sections?
Yes, please.
Okay. I will move through subsection A and just note that subsection A for that entire stretch of page 8 sets out legislative findings. And that is for legislators to vet, but these are supposed to be findings of fact that the General Assembly has made that explain policy choices made in the bill. So make sure that you review those and those align with your fact finding. In subsection B on page 9, there is an expression of intent. The intent of this section of law is to ensure Vermont's community radio stations remain resilient and prepared to serve as lifelines during emergencies while fostering local engagement and preserving Vermont's unique community fabric. This expression of intent might be used later on if there were ever some sort of legal challenge to this section of law. A court would use this expression of intent to divine what your intent as an assembly was in creating this section of law. Subsection C establishes the grant program that is the operative provision of the bill. The program is established to provide one-time funding to community radio stations for the purpose of upgrading equipment and infrastructure, procuring and installing backup generators, and enhancing operational sustainability through software improvements and technical training. Subdivision 2, the Commissioner of Public Safety is designated as the officer, responsible for administering the program. There's direction here for the Commissioner to collaborate with the Vermont Association of Broadcasters. Subdivision 3, we have the express grant amounts. So the grants must be allocated up to $25,000 per station for 7 active community radio stations. And up to $10,000 per station for 3 upcoming stations currently under construction. So $25,000 per station for 7 active existing community radio stations, and $10,000 per station for 3 upcoming stations that are currently under construction. Subdivision 4 covers eligibility. To be eligible, an applicant must, we're on page 10, be a nonprofit, non-commercial community radio station that is licensed in Vermont. Demonstrate a history of providing emergency broadcasting services or show the capacity to provide those services upon funding. And in draft 2.2, I will change the such to a those. No suches. Subdivision C, submit a detailed implementation plan for the proposed use of grant funding. In subsection D, there is a reporting requirement. On or before June 30th, 2026, a community radio station that receives a grant shall provide to the commissioner a report detailing the use of the grant funds, improvements achieved in emergency readiness and operational capacity, and finally, the impact on community service and engagement through the use of the funds. And I'll touch on the appropriation later in a separate appropriation section.
Questions on this? I mean, it's new in the bill, but it's not a new conversation. That was something we had flagged for inclusion before, but. Yeah. All right, seeing no hands, no concerns.
All right, brace yourselves because the next 3 sections are a little dense.
I feel I'm appropriately caffeinated.
And I hope that I'm appropriately caffeinated. And please stop me if you need to discuss any of the terms that are used so that we can make sure that they're clear and that we're all moving through this together. Section 10 adds a new section 1585 to Title 24. It's your municipal and county government title. This relates to unassigned fund balances. I'll tell you ahead of time to think of this as carry forward fund balances at the municipal level. The section states that monies from a budget approved by the voters at an annual or special meeting that are not expended by the end of a municipality's fiscal year shall be under the control and direction of the legislative body of the municipality and may be carried forward from year to year as an unassigned fund balance. Unassigned fund balances may be invested and reinvested as are other monies received by a town treasurer and may be expended for any public purpose as established by the legislative body of the municipality. So to bring us back to some of the basics here of municipal finance management, the voters approve a budget. The budget has to be expressed based on specific provisions in Title 17, either as a whole budget with informational hearings about how it's going to be used, or as express individually approved budget items. And there are some opportunities for the voters to engage with how, particularly the Australian ballot, the budget is presented. The budget for the fiscal year of the municipality has to be fully expended by the end of the fiscal year. This would allow any unexpended funds that were approved in the budget by the voters to be carried through the end of the fiscal year. At the end of that year, they go under the control of the select board or the city council, whatever the legislative body is, or the village trustees, and could be invested or reinvested according to the statutes and policies that govern the investment of municipal funds by the town treasurer, municipal treasurer. That's this section in a nutshell.
Representative Hango.
Thank you. So this kind of came up as a result of a town meeting last week in my district. Currently, without this law, what does the town do with the unexpended funds?
That's probably a great question for some of the local government advocates and experts who could tell you what municipalities are doing now, but
Is there
the
a
monies
law?
have to be.
I guess my question is there a statute that governs what we do now with the unexpended funds? That was my question.
I will have to brush back up on the
It's okay.
Chapter 51 municipal finances to see if there's an express directive that municipalities fully expend the funds at the end of the fiscal year, or whether they have to be returned to some other reserve fund.
Thank you.
And-
You do not have to get back to the after.
The reason I'm a little hesitant is that there are specific rules around discrete budget items and where unexpended funds are allowed to go, depending on
So
whether they relate to certain municipal functions.
I am going to defer to Samantha. Because I just got handed a note that she could offer insight on this.
Oh, great. Thank you.
It's like, where is she?
Hello.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Certainly.
Thank you. I'm zooming in from Hancock. So currently, unexpended funds must be allocated by an action of the voter. So, of the voters at the annual meeting of voters. So what typically happens is unexpended funds from, for example, fiscal year 25, at town meeting, voters would approve the fiscal year 26 budget, approve the appropriate authorities for tax setting according to that budget. And then there would be an additional article where there is a question along the lines of, shall the town expend X amount of surplus to the fiscal year 26 general fund? And then that article would pass or fail. If it passes, then the prior approved budget amount would be amended. And sometimes this happened in my town at our town meeting in 2024. We amended the warned question and we did create a reserve fund with that money. Reserve funds are restricted in use. Our town at that time chose to reserve it for town highway. So basically voters by the floor action gave our select board the authority to use those prior year's unexpended funds for town highway. What the unassigned fund balance does, and some municipalities have this through charter, is it carries over that funds, but allows more discretion by the legislative body in the sort of ensuing fiscal year.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
No further questions at this moment, council.
All right. And who's ready for section 11 on page 11? This is another new section. It adds section 1790 to title 24 related to emergency borrowing. The section states that the legislative body of a municipality may borrow money in the name of the municipal corporation by issuance of its notes or orders for the purpose of paying expenses of the municipal corporation or for public improvements associated with an all hazards event or a declared state of emergency. The notes or orders shall be for a period of not more than 5 years or a term not to exceed the reasonably anticipated useful life of the improvements or assets financed by the notes or orders. This is another area of law, indebtedness, where typically the voters have to provide express approval for this sort of bonding. There are some narrow exceptions for limited duration indebtedness. Here, the term is longer, 5 years, or the reasonably anticipated useful life of the improvement that the municipality is borrowing these funds for.
Representative Hango?
So this is a change in that the voters will not have to, this will not have to come before the voters. The select board or whomever is the legislative body will make that decision to seek out one of these notes
Yes,
for purposes of all hazard or state of emergency.
paying expenses that are incurred or for public improvements that are associated with an all hazards event or a state of emergency. And traditionally, and there is not, for example, a constitutional requirement for this, there's just maybe a legal principle here. Ultimately, when it's a debt in the name of the municipal corporation, the voters are the ones who are guaranteeing the payment of the debt. So Vermont's municipal statutes around indebtedness require voter approval because you get the consent of the voters to pay the debt off in the future. It's their taxes that are going to pay this debt. But in this limited set of circumstances under this section, the legislative body would have the authority to assume this debt in the name of the municipal corporation for these purposes and for a term of 5 years or the reasonably anticipated useful life of the improvement.
Thank you. And remind me, do we have a definition of an all hazards event that's actually in statute?
We do. Yes, 20 VSA Section 2 defines all hazards event. So the cross-reference at the end of the first sentence to 20 VSA Chapter 1, the intent there is to capture both the definition of what an all hazard is, but also to capture the process for the declared state of emergency.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the last of the kind of dense municipal finance pieces here. Section 12 amends 24 VSA Section 1759, and the TLDR version of what is happening here is that's too long, didn't read, is that this is allowing level debt repayment, level payments over time from the municipal corporation to the creditor who has lent money, likely municipal bond bank, to the municipality. In subdivision A1, I'm going to move through the current language because it will be difficult for me to describe some of the discrete changes here without giving you the lead-in. Any bond that is issued under this subchapter shall draw interest at a rate not to exceed the rate approved by the voters in accordance with Section 1758 of Title 24, or if no rate is specified in the vote, at a rate approved by, and I have another amendment here, legislative branch should be legislative body of the municipal corporation. The interest to be payable, it strikes semi-annually, which is the statutory repayment requirement currently, and replaces it with as determined by the legislative body of the municipal corporation. So less restrictive as to the repayment timing, puts it in the discretion of the legislative body. The bonds shall be payable serially. The first payment not to be deferred to be deferred not later than from 1 to 5 years after the issuance of the bonds and subsequent, inserted here, principal payments, qualifying the term payments to be the principal, the original value of what was borrowed, or debt service payments, which include both principal and interest, to be continued annually in, instead of the term equal, substantially level, or declining amounts as determined by the legislative body of the municipality. So providing options here for level debt service at the discretion of the legislative body. All right. Subdivision A2, in the case of bonds issued for the purchase or development of a municipal forest, the first payment may be deferred not more than 30 years from the date of issuance of the bond. These are all technical corrections until I start doing my Tuckerish voice. After any deferral period, the bonds or bond shall be payable annually in, striking equal and replacing it again with substantially level or declining annual debt service as the legislative body of the municipal corporation may determine. So that the entire debt will be paid in not more than 60 years. Subdivision 2, we read through it, is applicable to bonds for the purchase or development of a municipal forest. So a somewhat niche area for borrowing here. Subsection B, we're going to move into some general obligation bonds. Those forms of bonds authorized under this subchapter for the purpose of financing the improvement, construction, acquisition, repair, renovation, or replacement of a municipal plant. So now we're talking about a utility. As defined in 30 VSA section 2901 shall be paid serially. The first payment to be deferred not later than from 1 to 5 years after the issuance of the bonds, and subsequent principal payments or debt service payments, which include both principal and interest, to be continued annually in substantially level or declining amounts as determined by the legislative body. Later on in this subsection, quite a bit of language at the end is struck around arranging the repayment of principal, and that those are conforming amendments with now what is a discretionary option for the legislative body to elect into one of these level debt service arrangements.
At all digesting that?
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Is this the Ways and Means Committee?
What's that?
Is this the Ways and Means Committee?
We have some language that is relevant to them here. They will dial it in later. But we're just putting pieces together that we're capable of vetting now to the point.
No.
The runway is in sight and the landing gear is down. We're in the last change here in the amendment, and there's going to be a fun one in here. Fun just because of the legal term that I had to use to accurately describe what is happening.
I am anxiously.
So you have within subsection A of the appropriation section, this is section 13 on page 13, the two current appropriations that you're aware of, $275,000 to support the two positions for the Division of Emergency Management, $950,000 to support urban search and rescue. New in subdivision 3, this relates back to the new sections that you just took a look at around the Vermont Community Radio Grant Program, $205,000 appropriated for purposes of that program. And that also goes to public safety. So that entire subsection A, those are appropriations to public safety. And subsection B, this is the fun term. In FY26, $275,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the Agency of Natural Resources for purposes of procuring a fire apparatus. And apparatus is apparently the appropriate term in Title 23 and also in Title 20 to describe a fire truck. So fire apparatus.
This is an apparatus.
And can you remind us, is this the woodland?
This is the all-terrain firefighting vehicle we spoke to A&R about. We
Yes.
had, like, all joking aside, we had the worst fire season in recent memory. We are very, very under-equipped. We're looking to the future with, diligence to be prepared, not reactive.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to include this. We did have it in our budget memo. And quite frankly, when the cost was cited to us, I was a little surprised at how low it was compared to what a normal fire apparatus goes for at the municipal level.
Well, we added the 2.75 million.
That's what I'm saying. I was like, my first reaction was like, are you missing a comma? Yeah. So anyway, yeah. But I do love the word.
Fire apparatus.
All right.
Let's get to making an apparati.
Yeah. Their fire apparatus can also include fire hydrants. So I suppose that if they're strictly looking at the fire district sections of law, it could be a fire truck or a hydrant.
Gotcha.
$275,000 fire hydrant, but I'm sure it would be spectacular.
D&D joke. Yeah.
Subsection C, we're going to talk about unexpended funds again for just a moment. In subsection C, this requires that any of the unexpended funds that have been appropriated for the Vermont Community Radio Grant Program will revert to the general fund on or before July 1st, 2026. So of that $205,000 assigned to potential grants under the program, anything that isn't spent by July 1st, 2026 will go back to the general fund. That's all for the changes.
All right. Thank you very much, council. So we do have a couple of people who wanted to speak to the changes. I'm gonna let's start, because I think it's a smaller conversation. Let's start with Deputy State Auditor Ash. How are you, sir?
Feeling good. I've been enjoying listening to the progress you guys have been making. I can be exceedingly brief. I put a very short presentation on the committee website, or I should say Autumn did, and that just provides a little backstory. We were encouraging you to include what's now the first section, and I want to thank Tucker for kind of making it a little bit better. The sum and substance of it is we did an audit of the state's hazard mitigation plan. It is a requirement under FEMA. It includes a whole list of action steps which are directly relevant to all the work that you guys are laying out in this bill. The one thing that we noticed as a major gap is that the legislature never finds out what progress is being made on those things over time. So this bill costs nothing. And the Vermont Emergency Management, they already track progress on all these things. So it's not asking them to do a task they don't already do. It just has them informing you so that you're more knowledgeable as you make decisions like the ones you're making right now. So as I said, I always happy to hear myself talk, but in the interest of your time, which I know is limited today, I'll wrap there. And if you have questions, happy to answer them.
We will find space in the future to bring you back in for more banter. Any questions for the Deputy Auditor? No? All right. Thank you for your time, sir. And let us know if you got any other flags for us.
Okay, thanks a lot and have a great day.
You too.
Good luck.
All right, up next, Mr. Hanford.
Hey. For the record, Josh Hanford, Policy Director at Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Also, Samantha Shi is on to help with any questions that might arise. I want to thank you for having us in to talk about sections 10, 11, and 12 that you're considering including in the flood bill. These are all VSA 24 municipal government sections, and they're all related to flood. So that's why we bring them here today and strongly support them. These three items, there's a lot of good news about them. None of them cost the state any money. There's no appropriation to be asked. But what they do is address current and actual challenges with recovery and response that municipalities are dealing with over the last two floods. Yes. After extensive outreach and socializing and discussing these with a number of stakeholders, developing this with the Vermont Bond Bank, our municipal operations centers, we strongly support these changes that will add flexibility, save taxpayers money in reality, and address current issues and crisis at hand. In addition, we have heard no concerns from other stakeholders or folks that may see challenges with what's proposed here, and it's meeting current best government accounting practices. Often, one of these, the unassigned fund balance, is something that's cited in government audits as a recommendation that communities should have an unassigned fund balance on hand to meet best government accounting practices. So what we're talking about here, many of these affect rural towns, smaller towns. As you heard Tucker explain, which thanks Tucker for including these and doing such a good job of explaining some, as you said, dense issues. I think that's why some of this hasn't been able to get attention or in other bills a little earlier in the session, because this is pretty niche municipal government financing items here. They don't get a lot of attention or play, but are very important. Some towns have these authorizations in their charter, but half of communities in Vermont don't have a charter. So this is important in that regard. As I said, this has broadly been socialized in a number of committees here in the legislature as well. Senator Probst, Senate GovOps, House and Senate Transportation. Often these repairs and needs deal with transportation networks, so it's come up in that regard a number of times. As I said, the Vermont Bond Bank helped us draft these, and their attorneys reviewed it, our attorneys reviewed it, clerks and treasurers, the school business officials, government finance officials have looked at these as well. And I said, and regarding the unassigned fund balance, it's been a recommendation of a number of auditors in when their municipal audits are taking place. Together, these all improve emergency responsiveness for municipalities, create new stabilizing factors that for local property taxes will improve readiness, trying to access quick grants, having a fund on hand. And it's even more important as we sort of approach a period here where we're not sure if there's going to be as many federal funds to draw down and react to grants. It's important to make sure our house is in order and we have the authorizations to respond to crises at hand. Just a little overview to explain sort of the impacts of the flood to date, the floods, and how we've understood them. A number of towns are waiting for massive amounts of FEMA reimbursement. Linden has been hit twice in the last both summers. They're waiting for $15 million in outstanding debt. Moortown, Middletown, you can go down the list. And of the towns that were impacted by the July 24 severe storms, 1/3 of those make up 91% of the damages. So some towns were hit very hard in that particular series of floods. And 2/3 of the municipalities impacted were also impacted by the 23 floods. And when you look at the impacts, there are a large number of these communities that are below 5,000 in population that receive the vast majority of damages. Not to say that larger communities aren't impacted as well. The unassigned fund balance, and please interrupt me with any questions as Tucker went through it. This is a prudent fiscal practice to allow an unassigned fund balance within the municipal general fund. Sometimes folks call it a rainy day fund. It's simply a difference between the assets and the liabilities. As Samantha answered, currently without this authorization, municipalities only have a couple choices. One of them is to set up a reserve fund that specifies exactly what it could be used for and only that. It's pretty hard to guess what your emergency needs might be in the next year or the next couple of years. Another interesting note about unassigned fund balances is they can reduce sort of your borrowing cost. It's recommended, just like in any household budget, any business budget, that you have some percentage on hand in emergencies. That on hand allows you to borrow at a lower rate, respond to the needs of the day, quickly apply for a grant because you have a small match. So it is best practice. I covered all those, which the sort of borrowing position in that grant saves taxpayers' monies overall. The emergency borrowing, this is also a direct sort of response to what we've seen from municipalities. It takes more than 1 year to receive your FEMA reimbursement, many years. In fact, FEMA has a lending program in anticipation of your FEMA reimbursement, emergency lending program that we can't participate in because it goes beyond 1 year. And so this asks to allow the legislative body to undertake this emergency borrowing for up to 5 years is, again, one way that a legislature could assist municipalities in responding to the emergencies of the day, make them more prepared. We know how challenging it is to access this sort of FEMA reimbursement and other federal funds. We talk about them for many years before they actually show up. In the meantime, you can't wait to repair your roads, your culverts. People need to get to work. They need to get to school. Things need to be repaired. And so we need this flexibility to do this. As you mentioned, right now, without a townwide vote, you can only borrow for 1 year. Some might say, why not wait for the townwide vote? Well, there's emergencies that happen. There are people that are elected to take these responsibilities. This is a way to address the needs, and it's still a limited period of time. This isn't bonding for a long-term project that would still require the approval of all voters. Maybe the most complicated one to understand, and I have a few charts afterwards, is the level debt service. But the easiest way to think about it is if you have a mortgage or a loan on your vehicle, it doesn't change each month, right? Stays the same. You've figured out the principal and the interest and your payments, you can plan for them. We're asking for this authority at the municipal level. They can still choose to have the other instrument that has equal principal payments, but the interest is tapered off. And so I think I have a chart here in the next one. It really explains this. So this is what all municipalities are authorized right now. So you have to pay more at the beginning. That could be a struggle for your municipal budgets, especially as you're undertaking, a big infrastructure project. The level set is this. It's equalized. And this doesn't require that municipalities take this approach. They can choose either one. So I think the charts are the simplest way to explain something complicated here.
Representative Waters Evans had a hand up.
Thank you. Do you know why they're currently required to be level principal? Why this wasn't? I know you didn't write the law. I was wondering if only because it's a little new to me. So I'm wondering.
It's new to me as well.
Yeah.
And talking to the bond bank and others, it just seems that many of our municipal authorizations are sort of outdated, don't meet modern sort of government finance. Municipalities can't obtain this authorization without legislative approval.
Yeah.
And with 2 repeated years of flooding in a municipal operations center, where we have staff very experienced working with municipalities, this has come up more frequently and have made a concerted effort to understand what we could do at the municipal level with authorization to address more of these issues right at the local government, the source where it's most important. I see Samantha coming on screen, and she has some experiences, in Burlington where they've had some of sort of these authorizations and can really express that dramatic savings and benefit of them. I don't know if that's what you were coming on for, but I'll turn it over to Samantha for a second to help answer that question.
Thanks.
Thanks. I was going to first affirm basically what Josh said about the history of the Debt Service Authority, which is just to say that going back to when these laws were first established, municipalities did not have debt authorities. Their bonding all went to the legislature for approval. And so the various authorities for municipal government under state law to establish municipal debt and manage it has grown over time with successive legislative action over many, many decades. So we're here again at one of these sort of points of modernization. Josh, if you could put the first graph up. So one thing I wanted to say about this modeling was provided by the Vermont Bond Bank, but some of you may have experienced in your own town votes for various types of municipal or school district bonding for school construction. Oftentimes, because of this requirement to have the full principal payment up front, for very large bonds, municipalities will borrow down in a serialized way. And so what actually ends up happening on the property tax bill is, rather than a downward slide like is shown here, they'll borrow, if the voters give $100 million bonding authority, they may borrow 50 million the first year, 25 million the second year, 25 million the third year. And then this ends up looking like kind of a crazy staircase. And that provides a lot of irregularity for both the municipal officials in setting future municipal budgets, but also for property taxpayers who may not understand why their property tax bill goes up and then down and then up and then down. So that's what we mean by providing a stabilizing factor with this second option of debt service. And then, yeah, while I'm on screen, I will add some comment about the way the unassigned fund balance can save taxpayer money, which is that because this improves borrowing position for the municipality, basically they can receive lower interest rates on future borrowing. When the city of Burlington in 2012 was facing its sort of major financial crisis of the decade related to Burlington Telecom, they took an unusual action, which was to borrow money to rebuild their unassigned fund balance. They're one of the municipalities that have this authority under charter. And at the time, of course, there was a lot of concern and sort of skepticism about how to deal with what was happening. And the city council had required that the administration report annually on the productivity of that action to restore the unassigned fund balance. And they wanted annual checkbacks to make sure that that decision was doing what it was supposed to do, which is to improve the credit rating of the city of Burlington and to save taxpayers money. And so since 2012, that has happened every year, usually in the spring. And the most recent financial report related to that shows that by taking the unassigned fund balance, which was negative in 2012, and bringing it up to a healthy percentage of the general fund, the borrowing that happened between then and now has saved the city of Burlington 44 million in just interest on debt. And almost or roughly half of that savings actually came after the really significant bond to build the new Burlington High School that just happened recently. So that's just sort of an anecdote from the field of how this saves taxpayers the cost on municipal costs in every budget year. Other municipalities have compelling stories, including Barry, of having established an unassigned fund balance, maintained it at a healthy level, and then had that money available as part of their flood response in 2024. So it really can do both things at the same time.
I know you guys are on a tight schedule, so we wanted to be brief as we provide you some context here, really emphasize this is related to flood issues. And it is, municipal government authority that saves taxpayers money, doesn't cost the state, doesn't require an appropriation, and really hope you'll consider including it.
Yeah. No, thank you. Any feedback, questions for Mr. Hanford? Ms. Shannon? Oh. Is that a?
No, that's exactly what we do in Dorset. We take the fund balance, we bring it to the voters. Decide where it's gonna go.
All right. So right now, we had a couple of edits, Mr. Anderson, or a couple of edits that he was handling. We are scheduled to vote this out after lunch. I'd like to maintain that trajectory. So is everybody feeling comfortable in the direction that we're headed? All right. I am going to push our callback time an extra 15 minutes, just due to a series of lunch period meeting obligations that I have. So we will reconvene at 1:15 and hopefully wrap up H397. That was very good work on a bill that we only had possession of for a short period of time. So I want to thank all of you, both at the table in the gallery and all the other places listening, for all of your help.
I have some questions that wasn't really like, we just have like witnesses that I don't think are, like, are we gonna have like open committee discussion
Yes.
without having this,
What's that?
without having like a specific witness? we can
That's
talk
what we have
about
discussion mark up and noted.
I just wanted to make sure that's on.
So,